Oh.
Star Wars Outlaws has been out for about a month now, and pretty much everyone knows that it sucks. Now, if you were paying attention, there actually was a very subtle hint in its trailers. Let's look at this very short clip and see if you can spot it. Did you see it? It's the Ubisoft logo. Jokes aside, Ubisoft has two major issues that are emblematic of its brand. Three if you count the abuse. The first is an insatiable lust for money, and the second is a severe disconnect with what players want. In fact, chances are that every single one of you watching this video will have at least one stupid thing they've said or done in your mind. Earlier this year, Ubisoft made the rounds of infamy again by claiming that gamers should get used to not owning their games. Another fantastic claim to be put right next to their failed attempts to make NFTs relevant in gaming, and their desperate pleas to normalize games being more and more expensive. I mean, of course they have to be. How else could you afford breakfast? On a yacht? Anyway, this video is not about Ubisoft, it's about Star Wars Outlaws. I have obtained its Platinum Trophy in preparation for this breakdown. Now, if you want a spoiler-free recommendation of whether I tell you to buy this game, let me save you some time. No, I would not. You may go now. So, for this video, I'm going to focus on 4 specific things. I'll start with its story and characters, so that we're all on the same page about what's going on, and to also discuss its writing. Then, we'll follow up with its gameplay, and afterwards talk about its syndicates, because they're a very huge part of this game's identity as the scoundrel experience. Lastly, we'll wrap up with how absolutely unpolished this game is. It's honestly wild for 80 euros or whatever equivalent have you. There are a lot of issues here, and this should be highlighted. I even discovered a game-breaking bug myself, so stay tuned for that exciting part of the video. So, grab your trusty blaster, a cute space companion, hit that subscribe button, because it's a nice way to support the channel, and let's jump right into No, not into the planet! Star Wars Outlaws puts you in the shoes of Vess, a street thief from the Kanto region. She's a broke gal with a big heart and dreams of Versace. She's also the reason the game is apparently considered woke, because the size of her tits isn't big enough? Weird priority in game design right there. Kay's goal here is simple: get off planet and go to the core worlds, while doing some thieving to be set for life. This brings her across a group who intend to infiltrate a rich crime lord's vault. Kay here is intrigued because this means she could get a lot of credits, but it all goes sideways when instead of a vast wealth she finds a rebel prisoner. The team lied to her, and we get the first pronounced sign of Kay's personality as she proceeds to pull out her blaster mid-heist and bring everyone to a standstill, because that's a really good idea. She's then knocked out by a non-lethal blaster shot, which I didn't know was a thing, and is left behind. Sometime later, she regains her consciousness, manages to steal a ship, and escape to Toshara, where she crash lands. This is the bit where the game opens up its gameplay to you. You get introduced to syndicates and their brokers, you get to explore the world, get info about treasures, and engage in various activities. Your goal here will be to repair the ship with the help of a Rodian, Waka, who eventually betrays Kay. Now, let's ignore how he somehow shows up here despite needing a very fast speeder and athletic capabilities. Plot convenience is a heck of a thing. Anyway, Kay escapes and meets Jalen, who is very... He hires Kay for another heist against Liro, the same crime lord from the beginning. His android, ND5, joins Kay as she puts together a team. This opens up 3 new planets, and you're free to tackle them in whichever order you want. Now, these recruitment bits are kind of short. They're a string of 2 to 3 missions, and that's kind of it. You don't really do much more with these crewmates, their involvement is minimal, and you can just move on to the next. This part where you put together a team might actually strike you as a bit similar with another games, or well, trilogy from more than a decade ago. Mass Effect is also a sci-fi game centered around putting together a team. The difference between these two games, however, is that BioWare knew what it was doing. You don't just go around and collect people, you engage with them in conversations, earn their trust, and fight side by side. It's one thing to imply camaraderie, and another entirely to execute it. That's what Mass Effect does best. You don't just have these scripted personal missions and conversations, you literally pick them to fight with you and issue them commands. This forges a very special bond between players and characters. In comparison, Outlaws has nothing of the sort. I mean, sure, there are a few missions where you fight side by side with someone, but for the vast majority of time, you are alone. Other than rarely talking to them, they have no loyalty missions, they don't interact with other stuff like opportunities or contracts. They can't even be called upon in gameplay to provide any kind of assistance, they're just there. This is what's going to make discussing the writing of these characters pretty light, because these major characters really don't have anything going for them other than a bit of context. I think you can count on one hand the amount of times you can talk to them individually on the ship. The only character I felt any kind of affinity towards was ND5, but that's because he's the only character who constantly talks to you. So if the story doesn't focus on team building, what happens when you collect your crew? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's the end of the game. This game is incredibly short. Whereas a game like Mass Effect offers an epic of a commander and his team opposing insurmountable situations, Star Wars Outlaws speedruns the process. You get your crew and then you just get on with it. And that's kind of a problem writing-wise. You need a sense of anticipation, of rising action to build towards this final confrontation. When you put your team together, the focus of the story isn't supposed to be that, it should be the characters themselves. Who they are, what they stand for. Ubisoft, however, I think tried to use this part instead to build anticipation, and subsequently failed, because this endgame warning felt like it came out of nowhere. But in the end, I think this is part of a bigger problem with the game's structure. I feel like this game misses a really huge opportunity to do something more unique than a semi-linear story. I think the game could have been a lot more engaging if it were to focus on the idea of heists in the Star Wars universe. I think specifically of more of a mix between a linear story and arcade gameplay, where you have a section of the story focused around putting this team together and then a much larger section where you all go on heists. There's a lot of things that you could do with this idea. These heists could be an entire gameplay system. Imagine scoping places out to learn their layouts, potential exploits, etc. Then, when you're ready for the heist, you strategize where and for what you send your crewmates. Then, you could upgrade them to make them better at their roles, get lots of credits to buy expensive stuff that would otherwise be very inaccessible without heists. I know that we are approaching you wish this game would be different levels of Delulu here, but I find it an undeniably appealing idea that would work really well with the setting and the motif of an outlaw. Definitely more exciting than the formulaic story experience we got. I also want to add that it's kind of tiring how Star Wars media in general tends to focus on this one Empire era. Like, your game can be a Star Wars game without Darth Vader making an appearance. I know, I'm talking some wild shit. But when you look at the entire mythos of Star Wars, there are so many time periods that could do with some more attention and be used to tell new and interesting stories. But to this point, we are adding more and more context to a chapter of Star Wars that ended around 40 years ago. Star Wars Outlaws doesn't even further it. It feels like Vader is there for fan service. Conversely, I do have to give the game some credit. It does not mention the Force at all. In terms of character writing, let's start with Kay, because honestly she's half of what's worth discussing here, with ND5 being the other. She's written as this hot-headed, careless, unsure character, and it doesn't help that the way she talks is annoying. I'll be honest, I wasn't a fan of her at first, she's quite unlikable, but against my better judgment, I decided to hold my horses, for the simple reason that maybe it's a way to showcase character growth. Like in the end, she'd be this confident and excellent liar and manipulator. Creative director Julian Gerry Giggity states that this is in fact deliberate.
She's somebody who is very much a street thief, who gets thrown into things that are beyond her control and that she has to kind of fake a way out of. And that makes it a little bit more relatable than somebody who has all the confidence and sarcasm and just comes off as somebody who is not believable.
That is a really good idea. The unfortunate thing, however, is that character development needs both character and development. Can you guess which one is in short supply?
Correcto!
I feel like Kay's character stays the same, or even sometimes regresses. Like, back at the start, she's betrayed by Waka and then she's vehement about not trusting anyone going forward. But then she meets Jalen with ND5 and pretty much trusts them, even though it's very obvious they would betray her. Even when she has to work with someone who she doesn't trust, her sole character trait seems to be making snarky comments. For instance, at the end, Kay is reunited with her mom, Rico, a person who was hinted to have existed, and for every single line Rico has, Kay has one petty comment ready to go. For this character development to work, Kay would need a stronger trait than having petty comebacks. She could, for example, make contingency plans in case she gets betrayed, but no, when she's betrayed, someone else has to do it for her. Kay's character is a constant, and that's a problem. ND5, however, is actually quite compelling. He's a droid with his own thoughts and perspective and dry humor that is actually funny.
Lieutenant Vess. I could get used to that.
You wouldn't last 5 minutes in my unit.
But he also has a restraining bolt that inherently makes him loyal to Jalen. As the story progresses, he slowly starts warming up the Kay, and she even tries talking to him about removing the bolt. The way ND5 talks is so interesting to me. He keeps advising Kay to drop the subject or he would be forced to kill her, but the way he does it is more in concern for her rather than him viewing Kay as an enemy. He knows that Kay talking about this subject might make the bolt make him kill her, and he really doesn't want that. This actually plays a big role in the finale when Kay returns to Jalen to free ND5, where his desire to help Kay is at odds with the loyalty bolt. ND5 acknowledges that Kay is different than the other scoundrels he's worked with and genuinely wants her to survive. It actually made the finale pretty tense despite being a forced stealth section on steroids. The problem, really, is that this character is the only one that is well done, the only one worth talking about. Other than that, there is some really limited interactions with a handful of characters, or at times downright terrible dialogue. Like, I felt that some of it was so shit they just had an AI prompt with, how would Kay respond? This is not a joke, by the way. Ubisoft actually has a writing AI, look it up. Some dialogue feels out of place, as if the writer had no understanding of the relationship between characters or context tension, which is what makes me suspect they are AI written. The game is just that shallow when it comes to both the story and the characters that inhabit it. The gameplay of Star Wars Outlaws focuses on two main aspects. Well, three if you count navigating a world that is as huge as it is dead. The first is stealth, and I'm going to say something positive about the game for once, while simultaneously potentially being in the minority here. I want to do it anyway, because when I give an overview of a game, I want to give credit where I feel credit is due. I actually really like the approach to stealth here. It's a more uncompromisingly difficult component of the game where the moment you're spotted, someone is alerted and immediately investigates. It's something that I feel is a lot more organic than a gauge filling up with an NPC just standing there and taking 5 business days to realize it spotted you. Then you have components that complement this playstyle of a scoundrel, stuff like fast-talking enemies to give you a few extra seconds to respond. Just as well, Nyx is a pretty good companion, enabling you to stealthily tackle situations that would otherwise be untenable alone. I will concede though that the forced stealth sections in cities are a bit much. You're not allowed to use your gun as if you're a law-abiding citizen all of a sudden, and the moment you're detected, you're immediately captured. It's a lot less forgiving to a point that I would agree is frustrating. Outside though, it's a lot more manageable since you can enter combat but you must prevent enemies from triggering an alarm. And if you're sneaking into a faction territory, you also have to keep paying attention because otherwise it will affect your standing. I would also add that the stealth knockout animations are kinda bad. A lot of them lack that oomph that clearly conveys that someone was knocked out. Hell, one of them is Kay aggressively throwing someone's head on the ground. Of course, we also have the hacking minigames, which are for the most part as unimaginative as they come. But one thing I will say I appreciate is that hacking is done in real time. Like, yeah, the data spike rhythm bullshit is pretty annoying, and they also don't really do something too complex with it. I mean, they reuse the beats a few times and it becomes very predictable. Look at this, you can sometimes genuinely guess the rhythm on your first try. But there is an undeniable atmospheric touch to it. Because you have to be stealthy, you can look left and right while you hack, and that's great. I find this to be a surprisingly solid design decision that adds tension because of this match between being stealthy and doing puzzles in real time. And it's the sort of thing that stealth games rarely do, despite potentially adding an amazing layer of complexity and a unique atmosphere to it. So, all in all, I did enjoy this bit. Good on you, Ubisoft. You got a compliment. Then we move on to the shooter gameplay. This bit is, in my opinion, very meh. In combat, you can either shoot or punch, which I find increasingly resonates with me as an aging homosexual. Now, for the most part, what you'll be using is Case Blaster. This blaster will eventually get additional options, like a mode that disables shields and works great against droids, and a charged shot that can destroy obstacles, but is otherwise too shit to control in a fight. Now, all of these modes also have sub-modes that change things like rate of fire, and they each have their separate upgrades. So, what exactly is my problem with it? Well, I just found it boring, because these modes don't really impact my playstyle or my general approach to a fight. Fortunately though, the game does let you pick up enemy weapons at least half the time. You can even have Nyx fetch them for you while you're in cover, which is neat. These ones can actually affect your approach quite a bit. They're stronger than the blaster, and some of them even feature a shield. My biggest grievance with the system is that you can't keep them. Just about any sort of action makes K drop them. I really would have wished for the opportunity to be able to carry one with me. And look, I know that the blaster as the only personal weapon is a design choice. It's a weapon you'd associate with an outlaw in Star Wars. But having only this weapon made my experience repetitive and boring fast. Apart from that, we also have space battles. It's for the most part pretty okay. My only real issue with it is that it feels a bit annoying to control because you don't have access to advanced combat maneuvers from the start, so you always have to clumsily and slowly turn around to retarget. I do, however, appreciate that it features a full 360 movement system. It brings a certain realism to space combat because there's no real up and down. A thing that I really dislike about it though is the customization system. You can only change color palettes, but their saturation is really low and can barely be seen. Then you can also have a trinket, which is not something you can see at all during ship gameplay. The speeder has the same issue, except that the trinket is actually visible. Overall, pretty meh gameplay, and I do tend to agree with the opinion that this game feels like an Assassin's Creed game, though I do have to say that the environmental design is at times so shit that they have to use arrows to show you where you're supposed to go. Syndicates are a very big part of Outlaws, and during interviews they were talking a big game.
It's a dynamic world that you'll be stepping into with factions maybe fighting against the Empire, maybe fighting amongst themselves. There'll be stories that'll create around you that you can choose to engage in or not.
So, there are 4 main syndicates, 3 available at the start and the 4th once you reach Kajimi. There are also the Imperials and Zerek Besh, but they are not part of this overall system. Essentially, how this works is that during some parts of the story, some side quests and contracts, you'll have to choose or betray a side in exchange for a different outcome or better pay. In turn, this will affect your reputation with these factions. High reputation means contracts with better rewards, exclusive items, discounts with vendors, and access to their territories. Low reputation means exactly the opposite: higher prices, unavailable items, off-limit areas, and if they really hate you, hit squads. Now this as a concept is a really good idea. What better way to capture the essence of a criminal underworld than through criminal factions that you can not only have as fixed enemies or allies, but actively change allegiances with? This is a good basis. The problem, as it often is with the execution. The more time I spent with these syndicates, the more it became obvious how rigid they are. The game starts quite strong. One of the first main missions sends you to a poaching facility under the control of the Pikes. The Hutts want you to infiltrate it, get some data on their customers, and blow it up. But it turns out that the other person working with you is a double agent for Crimson Dawn. This is a great setup involving most of these syndicates. If you're spotted, your reputation with the Pikes suffers. Then you can also double-cross the Hutts in favor of Crimson Dawn, which affects your reputation and the rewards you receive. However, this is as complex as it gets. In fact, nothing else will ever come close to this level of complexity. The rest of these narratives involving factions only involve 2 of them and only have consequences reputation-wise, but not on the play space as a whole. There are many times, for example, where Crimson Dawn wants to make a move against another syndicate and seize power. This happens early on, where a Pike trader works with the Crimson Dawn to conspire against and dethrone Gorak, the Pike leader. But regardless of what you choose, nothing happens outside of the rewards and reputation you receive. Same thing happens on Kajimi, where an Ashiga traitor attempts to do the same with the support of Crimson Dawn. This time, you do get to decide if the traitor succeeds, as they either die or replace the current Ashiga leader. But nothing really changes in the world. The Ashiga remain exactly the same. You never even get to see this character again. And it is funny how, regardless of who you choose, the leader looks nearly identical. It's kind of like an unintentional metaphor on how your choice doesn't matter. This is a very frequent problem for games that can commit to drastic changes made to their world. It's this design philosophy that regardless of what happens, you can't make content unavailable. Either that, or simple unwillingness to make storytelling experiences not everyone will come across. It's a very typical thing for AAA games after all. But because of this, the decisions you make, the narratives you experience, they all exist in a vacuum. Nothing affects something else. It would have been very different if you were to enable these groups to expand, causing others to disappear. The leader of Crimson Dawn even tells Kay as much, as if she's unaware of the game she's in. There's one trophy you unlock for reaching the lowest reputation rank with any syndicate, and this is where things get worse. To begin with, I found that lowering reputation with syndicates is paradoxically slow. The way I decided to lower my reputation with the Pikes was by going to a place on the map they control and start blasting. Despite killing many members, my reputation would decrease very slowly. It's a really weird thing consistency-wise in-universe. You have an unaffiliated scoundrel that just kills for no reason, but syndicates are oddly permissive of it. I even did a second playthrough where I aimed to maintain a terrible relationship with each of the 4 syndicates, which took hours to achieve, by the way, and it was downright stupid to see how these syndicates would still give you missions to do for them. Like, at this point, you are one of the most untrustworthy people they know. This absolute nonsense also carries through to the main story, because the writing doesn't take into account your standing. There's this one part on Tatooine where Jabba threatens to destroy your ship if you try to leave before you do a job for him, which raises the question, why wouldn't he do it anyway? My standing with them is dirt poor. I go out of my way to lower it, in fact. This is what I mean when I say that these syndicates are overall a rigid system. There's nothing dynamic to them, and your allegiance doesn't matter when the story kicks in. Also, it's a really weird thing how the creative director said that he had difficulties maxing the rep with every syndicate. It's actually really easy. Like, have you played your own game? I'll also say that the syndicates themselves are not built equally, in particular the Ashiga and the Hutts. On every planet, there are 2 syndicates vying for power. They will have strongholds in cities and territories around the map. The only exception is Tatooine, where only the Hutts have territories, but then you also have Kijimi. Kijimi is different from the other planets because there's no open world part to it, it's just a city. But it's also the only planet where the Ashiga are active. This puts the Ashiga in a weird position where they're the only ones you cannot engage in combat outside of the story. And that's kind of a big deal, because not only do they not have any kind of presence outside of their story, but also because one thing that the game does right is that it gives these syndicates an identity in combat. Besides from regular mercs, they have special units that make fighting them different. The Pikes have Shield Bros, the Hutts have Pig Boys. Now the Ashiga do have a special unit. It's this spider that blows itself up, but I nearly forgot about them because you do not encounter them anywhere else but this room. Then we have the Syndicate contracts. This is the more arcadey side of the system, where you take up generated tasks and complete them for reputation and rewards. They are very formulaic, and I think once you do a handful of them, you get to see the structure. It's basically do a certain thing, and at the end, ND5 tells you that there's an offer and you get to either complete the contract or double cross for a larger reward in exchange for reputation. That's it. This actually got me thinking of another disconnect between developers and players. It's not really what they would call
dynamic
content as much as it is just randomized quests. The game essentially just generates them out of a pool of possibilities. In fact, on a few occasions I even ran across the exact same mission with the only difference being the faction you do it for. This is basically what Skyrim did with its generated Radiant quests. I could make a joke here about Ubisoft bringing the quest design of yesterday today, but Skyrim was released about 13 years ago. What's exactly new here? The fact that sometimes you have to deliver something from one planet to another? Okay. In the end, I think that this Syndicate system reveals a very simple truth. Having a randomized system of quests and side stories that happen in a vacuum is no way to produce interactions and stories that feel organic. You need a more handcrafted approach and the willingness to change things so that you may convey consequences to what you do. Double-crossing a faction needs to be more than here's some arrows. The game has the tools to achieve this, I'd say, but it doesn't use them. There's many characters related to these syndicates that see no use outside of their one quest. This gal that betrays the Hutts? Never seen again. This corrupt Imperial who's butt mad about not receiving a bribe from you? Never seen again. Alira? She just gives you contracts and then just stands there. There is such an opportunity to make questlines that intersect one another, behaviors that change based on standings, consequences that end a story and let another continue, but none of this is done. It's truly an outdated gameplay ecosystem, and that's a shame. I would be remiss not to mention how much of an unpolished and buggy mess this game is in this review. It's bad. It's really bad. From simple visual errors to crashes to game-breaking bugs, this game has it all. I saw troopers walking on air, enemies getting below the death plane, rockets not appearing on the HUD, falling through the map. There's a lot. Of course, we have to mention the game-breaking bug that made the rounds on the internet, where people who purchased the gold edition had to delete their save file. Like, I am not of the opinion at all that the game is worth 80 euros, but imagine spending 120 euros to play a game early and to see this sorta shit. I have to give it to Ubisoft. Somehow, they managed to make you all playtest the game and pay for it. It's genius. In a really f***ed up kind of way. To those of you who like to warn others about the dangers of pre-ordering, you may rest easy today, the game did it for you. Of course, this doesn't stop here, no. At the time of writing, the platinum trophy of the game is not obtainable. There's this one trophy that requires you to interact with several collectibles in space. I know, exciting shit. For some reason though, one of them you just can't interact with. That's right, somehow Ubisoft f***ed up a collectable. And that's gonna be weird, right? Cause collectibles are Ubisoft's thing. But then we go to the game-breaking bug that yours truly found. Remember when I said that I did a second playthrough? Well, I didn't actually get to finish it. You see, in the very last sequence of the game you have to destroy a Star Destroyer, which I'll actually say is peak space combat. Nothing in the game comes even close to it. But what's supposed to happen here is that you have to destroy a spaceship with a communication jammer. After that, you're joined by some rebel spacecrafts and reinforcements from the Syndicate with the highest affinity. That's what's supposed to happen, but in this playthrough, every single time I destroyed that spaceship, the game would say that I'm out of bounds and turn my ship off, essentially forcing me to restart and destroy the jammer again. After doing it a dozen times, I eventually decided to stop trying and restart the mission entirely. And bear in mind, this is one of the longest quest chains in the entire game. You can't pause it or do anything else, you have to do it all in one go. So, that is 1 hour and a half gone down the drain. Let's restart and try again.
1 hour later.
Yep, this save file is broken. I do have one suspicion over why this happens. Before starting the finale, in this playthrough, I lowered my rep with every single syndicate as much as possible. It could be that the devs did not prepare for the scenario where a player has every single syndicate in an equally terrible state, and the game just freaks out. Either that, or God forbid, someone forgot to put a comma in the code and f***ed it all up. It's genuinely hard to tell given how much of a mess this game is. Star Wars Outlaws is a fantastic representation of Ubisoft's Big Six. Glitchy, unpolished, predictable, boring, disappointing, and overpriced. It's a shame. The premise is a really cool idea, but Ubisoft is a company blinded by its own formula. At this point, I genuinely believe that Ubisoft is its own worst enemy when it comes to making games. It's been squandering promise after promise, delivering mediocre experiences over and over again, and that is despite not only having loads of resources, but also access to such interesting intellectual properties. Earlier this year, they released a game based on the Avatar movies, and what it ended up being is just Far Cry, but with blue aliens. I know that this feels like I'm beating a dead horse, but this is what Ubisoft does best. So, would I recommend Star Wars Outlaws? I don't think this comes across as a shock, but for its asking price, the answer is fuck no. Leave it for 1 to 2 years when its price inevitably plummets, and hey, maybe your brain will do you a solid and forget all about it. And that's all I have to say for this video. Thank you for watching, thank you for your patronage. I'd appreciate it if you'd take the time to subscribe and help me out in the algorithm with a like. A bit of a personal update on the channel. I think this might be the last time in a while when I take the time to review new releases, and my reasoning for this is twofold. I started doing this late last year, and while my videos on Dragon's Dogma have helped me gain some traction, I haven't really had a breakthrough since. In the time it takes me to produce a video, people usually just move on, quite understandably so, because these games have no staying power, but from a logical perspective, it just doesn't work for me if I want to grow this channel. Which also brings me to point 2. I just don't enjoy playing these games. All of these new releases have been boring or disappointing. I mean, make no mistake, I will get Hades 2 and review it in a heartbeat, but that's because Supergiant earned it, you know? Many other large studios haven't, and I kind of feel done giving them my unearned attention. So, rant over, thank you again for watching and have a good one.